Hello and welcome to another viewer edit. Today I'm gonna take this beautiful picture from the Grand Canyon submitted by David, and I'm gonna turn it into a photo like this, while of course explaining every single step I do, every slider I adjust, and every single tool I use. David asked me if he could submit his picture via Picasa because there you are able to upload a RAW file. However, unfortunately, you can only download it as a JPEG file, so that's what I have here. But as I always say, for just a, very rough overall look, it doesn't really matter that much if JPEG or RAW. Of course, you can go farther with a RAW file, and at the end you will have a lot more detail, a lot less noise, and a lot more sharpening. But once again, for the overall look and the overall kind of mood of the picture, I don't really think it matters that much. So let's get started with the editing, or rather with the cropping first. I tried out a bunch of different crops before I actually started recording, and I don't think that ledge down here looks bad, but it's just a little bit cut off, and at the end I always preferred the picture without it. Maybe it would have worked a bit better if you would have included a bit more, especially in this portion right here, or just, I don't know if it was possible of course, but if it was, go a little bit further down, so the top portion of this ledge right here would have been a bit more up with the overall picture and a bit closer to this edge of these canyons right here just before entering the valley. Now, of course, you could definitely still edit this picture, and I think it actually doesn't look bad in any ways, but I think just cropping it like this will make a lot of things easier, and I just like the overall crop a little bit better for my taste. I'm also gonna straighten the horizon. I know there's not really a horizon in this picture, but I still think it looks a bit better if at least this portion is relatively straight. So let's get started here. I'm definitely gonna add a lot of contrast. I think that looks great. In terms of highlights, there's really no detail recoverable in the sky, and there aren't any clouds anyways, so I'm not even gonna try it. I'm actually gonna go with the overall look and, use this very bright portion as an element in the picture. So I'm not gonna really go too far down with the highlights, maybe just a bit to fine-tune it a little. And then to the shadows. Now, shadows are very difficult. Actually, before I adjust the shadows, let me go to the blacks, and I'm definitely gonna bring them down in any case. The question is if I want to raise the shadows so I can bring down the blacks even more. It's difficult to choose, but at the end I think actually it works. My other thought was of course to just bring down the shadows to make this a little bit more contrasty, but at the end I think it actually works better if I bring down the blacks quite far and then bring up the shadows, so just, it adds a lot of contrast and it makes the overall picture a little bit more dramatic, but it still has a little bit of detail here in the very dark shadow portions. Whereas I would, for example, go down with the shadows and just a little bit less down with the blacks, I still think it is a bit too dark and really almost no shadow detail in this entire right portion. So I'm just gonna go up with the shadows by quite a bit and bring down the blacks by 100 actually. Very, very rare that I do that. So let's just quickly see before any shadows and blacks adjustments, before and here is after. So you see it's a very contrasty scene, but because I brought up the shadows so much, it really isn't too dark and not too many details in the shadows are lost. Clarity is another very important thing, and even though I really like the low clarity look in the background, I think overall for the photo I am going to add a little bit of clarity. I see that a lot of people might be tempted to add like 100 or something like that, and I definitely think it looks good, but at the end it's just a little bit too much. It makes it to look a little bit unnatural and a little bit too harsh in some areas. So I'm actually just gonna raise the clarity by around 30 and leave it there. Then let's continue. Color temperature is not going to be super well adjustable in a JPEG file, but let's just play around with it regardless. I don't really think that I'm gonna warm it up here. I definitely think that I'm gonna add some split toning in a bit, but not really any temperature adjustments. So let's just finish up with the tint here, and actually I might add just a little bit of magenta tint, because I think that overall works a bit better and takes away some of that green cast. Before I go to split toning, of course want to adjust the whites, and oftentimes I like to bring up the whites quite a bit because it helps to give dynamic, but it's really, I don't think I can add so much here because then it really blows the picture and the entire left portion pretty much. But I am still going to add a little bit to give that little bit of extra dynamic. So let's finish it up with vibrant, and I really don't know if I want to add anything. Maybe just a little bit of vibrance. And then, as I said before, let's go straight away down to the split toning and go to the highlights. It's always worth to just go through all of these colors in case there might be one that you haven't even thought about. But at the end, I think it's gonna be a choice between a little bit of purple or the pretty classic orange tone. It's really, you could go either way, but I just think the orange tone looks a little bit more natural, so I'm just gonna choose that one, and of course fine adjust the amount of saturation, and just gonna leave it at around 30. And I am going to play around with the shadows. It's something that I usually leave out because it doesn't really have that big of an impact, especially if you have done highlights already. But I think I'm just gonna try to maybe add a little bit of purple in the relatively dark parts of the picture. Really just a hint. But I think it greatly helps to give more complexification in terms of color in the whole picture. So here is before that shadow adjustment of the purples, and here's after. It's a really small difference, but I actually really think it has a big impact. So here's before any split toning adjustments, and here's after. So you see it's a lot more colorful, it works a lot better with the lighting scheme, and I definitely think it looks good. So then let's go up to the tonal curve and adjust that one as well. I'm just gonna play around with these sliders since I don't really care about the sky too much because it's already too bright. I'm gonna mainly adjust it based upon the foreground impact. And these sliders, of course, don't really have too big of an impact in the foreground since they adjust the highlight portions, but I'm sure the darks are gonna have a much bigger impact. And I do like some of that look, especially here in the midground, but in the right corners, I just think it's too much. So I'm just gonna maybe bring them down a little bit and go to the shadows again and maybe bring down the shadows as well and just leave it like that. I can always go into the local adjustments a little bit later and of course add dodge and burning and contrast in certain areas, but I really don't want to go too far for the overall look. So here's before the tonal curve adjustment, here's after, just a little bit more contrasty. Point curve might be another thing that you want to play around with, but even though I don't mind the look in the foreground once again, it's just too much for the sides and the very bottom of the picture, so I'm just gonna leave that out linear. Then let's just quickly see if there's anything else I want to do. I definitely don't think that I'm going to add any vignetting because it's already so dark in the corners. So is there anything else? I don't really think that I'm going to do too much because all of these adjustments really only have an impact on either very small portions of the color or just the detail. And since this is of course not my picture, it's just about the overall look. But for example, detail and lens corrections tool, you definitely want to take advantage of those sliders and those tools if you edit this for yourself. But once again, for the overall overall look doesn't really matter. So before I go into the local adjustments, let's just quickly see the photo from before to after. And you see it's quite a lot of a difference. It's a lot more contrasty and all of these textures are a lot better visible. I know that the picture is relatively purplish, and you could definitely, adjust that and go a little bit differently with it, but personally I really actually like this look and it reminds me of some old film photos. But anyways, let's go on with the local adjustments here. In terms of the graduated filters, I don't really think that it's very much needed at all in this picture. Usually I like to bring it over the right side, bring down the exposure, bring it over the left side, and bring up the exposure. But since this already is such a heavy contrast between the very bright sky and this very dark valley, I really don't think that there's any of that needed. So let's actually go straight away to dodge and burning with the rail filters. And honestly, before I do any plus adjustments in this particular case, I'm actually gonna go into the minus exposure, and I am definitely going to add a lot of those. So here, before I do anything, let me explain. You see the lighting scheme, the lighting is coming from the left, hitting these portions, and I just want to exaggerate the difference between the litten portion and the dark portion. So I'm just gonna add some filters over here in the already dark portions, especially sort of small ones over here, to really give more a sense of contrast and a sense of differentiation. It's a very, different form of contrast, but I think it works greatly for quite a lot of the cases. And of course, because the actual, as you see here, the actual value of the adjustment is a lot smaller than the actual radial filter, you don't really have to worry about getting on the edges of some of the lit portions. So let me just go a little bit faster here, right click duplicate. This is probably a thing that you could do with the adjustment brush as well, but I'm just gonna stick with the radial filters for this case, because I usually do all of my dodge and burning with the rail filter. Maybe another smaller one over here, and just add a little bit of contrast by bringing down the exposure. Right click duplicate, and yeah, I don't think I'm gonna add too many more, maybe just a very dark one right here. And you don't have to go over the already very dark portions, but just the portions like here where you want to exaggerate the overall lighting scheme. I think it works really, really well. So let me finish that up with the negative exposure and maybe add another one. And let's see, is there anything else I want to adjust? I might have gone just a bit too far with some of these filters right here. That's also the great thing about radial filters. You can just go back to each individual filter and adjust the value of it. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's see before that negative exposure adjustment, and let's see after. And I know that it always looks very harsh and very unnatural if you see the direct comparison, but once you look at it for a while, it really should start to look natural. And I really love the differentiation in the exposures. You see, it's a very unique sort of contrast added by these negative exposure radial filters. But of course, to exaggerate the lighting scheme even more, I'm now gonna add some plus exposure filters. And sometimes if you have a very colorful picture or a very colorful lighting scheme, you can add even more light right here and exaggerate it this way as well. So I'm just gonna go over the bright portions where the light already hit, and sometimes mixing it with some contrast works quite well to make it look a little bit more natural. And of course adjust the value of the filter on the different parts. Right click duplicate, maybe just make this one a little bit brighter. I really don't think that I'm gonna have to add too many of these plus exposure filters here, but I'm just gonna add some very small ones here in the background. another one over here, and maybe a last one over there. This is definitely a thing that you could zoom in 1:1 and, you know, really make very small and very detailed adjustments, but just for the overall look, I think this is plenty. So once again, let's see before plus and negative exposure, dodge and burning, and here is before, here is after, and you see once again, in addition to making these portions darker, of course now I've also exaggerated the plus exposure parts. I think that this picture is pretty much done. Another thing that you could try to do is grab an adjustment brush, for example, and really go far into the negative exposure and try to make this right portion of the sky a little bit darker, so you even more have a sense of dynamic. But because there's not really any detail in the sky, it's really gonna be very difficult to make it look natural, so I'm just gonna leave it out. And the last thing that I'm actually gonna do is just go to this little rock and just clone that out. So let's see if Lightroom does a good job, and of course it doesn't when I'm recording. You just want to right click, select new source, and that looks a lot better. Actually, because some of you might watch this as my first video, I'm still gonna go quickly down to the detail tool and just go into the plus noise reduction, and you see all of that purple and green fringing just disappears. It's really a thing that you won't even notice unless you see the actual difference from before to after, and color noise reduction is definitely a great thing. While I'm at it, I might as well add a little bit of sharpening and bring the masking a little bit to the right. So you see, we don't have too much detail in this picture. You start to see some artifacts because of the heavy editing, but this is just the effect of a JPEG file. If you would have a RAW file, you could go a lot further with it and remain a lot more detail. So that's why I always say go shoot in RAW, but just for the zoomed out version for a video, it doesn't really matter. So let's go here into the history and see the before any editing version, and you see a lot of these textures aren't even really visible compared to what we've made out of it. And I know that this is a very heavily edited and a very artistic picture, and there are a lot of different ways to edit it and make it not as dramatic, but personally I really love this look and I think it works really well. Of course, if you wouldn't want to go that far, you could always bring back the sliders and maybe go more into the greens, go a little bit more into the warm tones, and overall have a little bit more of a neutral look. But once again, I really like this look right here a lot better in my personal taste. So yeah, I hope you liked this video and you found it helpful and interesting, and maybe you could even take away some tips or techniques from it. And of course, thank you very much for submitting your picture, David. It was really a lot of fun editing it. It's really a lot different than what I usually shoot. So once again, thank you all very much for watching, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already for RAW edits, Lightroom tutorials, landscapes, cityscape edits, all kind of stuff. I want to wish you a great day. I hope you get to take some awesome pictures. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.